Welcome to day 2 of Dynamics Con. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making this event free to our community. Get ready to skill up with our Dynamics and Power Platform superheroes. And be sure to stick around after the sessions to participate in our networking breakout rooms. Please welcome our first speaker of the day in the GP track, Mark Polino, a Director of Client Services. Today, he will be presenting 50 security tips and tricks for Dynamics GP. Please stick around after Mark's session for a live Q&A.
Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamics Con. I'm Mark Polino with Fastpath, and we are going to spend some time today looking at 50 security tips for Dynamics GP. It's great to have all of you here. Virtual Dynamics Con would be fun to get together in person, but instead we will just do it this way. So I'm going to be taking questions in the chat throughout the whole thing, and then I'll be able to answer that when we get to the end. So this is going to be very fast. 50 tips in 40 minutes is faster than anything I've ever done. So having that stuff in the chat is going to be the place to put your questions. That's the way to handle this, and we'll tackle those at the end. So 50 tips, 40 minutes, buckle up, let's go. All right. So we're looking at security tips today. The first one is really straightforward. Inside of Dynamics GP, there's a setting in Setup Company that is the master switch for security. So if this gets turned off, you have no security on in GP and folks can do whatever they want. I'm not sure why there's a master switch for security, but there is, so you want to make sure that it's turned on. That is the simplest and easiest security tip you've got. Make sure security is turned on. Number 2, you want to restrict access to that window, because if people can get to company setup, then they can go and turn security off. So it seems to make sense that you want to restrict their access there. All right, up for number 3 here. Only set account security with the organizational structure. So in security setup, in the company window right under security setup is a thing called account security. And a lot of people think, well, if security is good, account security must be better, and they check that box as well. The problem is that restricts the chart of accounts to people with specific access. And if you haven't done the setup in organizational structures, what happens is it appears as though your entire chart of accounts has been deleted, and the only person who can access them is the system administrator, the SA account. So in that scenario, the good news is it's really easy to fix it. You just check the box and everything comes back. The bad part about that is it can be a career-limiting move if everyone thinks the chart of accounts has been deleted. So you want to be careful with that one. Most folks should leave this off unless they're prepared and ready to go and done a bunch of testing with it. So you really want to work with just company security. All right, number 4, we want to minimize the SA user. So SA is the system administrator. It has full access to everything, including SQL. So if your SQL servers are chained together, it's possible that SA not only has access to this SQL server, but even other SQL servers. So I've got a link here to a white paper. It's a free white paper on how to minimize the use of the SA user. There's also links in that document back to GP's security manual, which explains a lot of the pieces in there as well. Again, it's free, so just go and grab that. No way I can explain that in the minute or 2 that I have here. But the nice thing is it's all laid out for you to be able to figure out how to really minimize using that SA user. Number 5. There's a couple of challenges with SA. It has access to everything. The other challenge is that SA is often used for connections, and that is a bit of a no-no. We've all done it. I've done it in my career. So this is not a judgment. It's just cleaning them up is a problem. So if you've got third parties or integration tools or other things that are connected in, if you connect them with the SA user, they work great. But that basically means you can't ever change the SA password or things break. So the only way I've found to fix this is it's pretty difficult to trace. You've got to go and remember the old SA password, stick that somewhere, change it to something new, go try stuff out and see what breaks, note down what breaks, and then go back to the previous SA password so everything will start working again. And from there, now you've got a list of things that you need to go fix. And sometimes these are in the install parts. Sometimes they're in other places, but you got to go pull up those third-party apps, those integration tools, and get those pieces changed to use something other than SA. Because the best practice is to periodically change that SA password. And with these items in place, you're not able to do that. You could have folks that then leave the organization and now they've got your SA password and you're never going to be able to change that. So it can present a pretty significant risk. All right, number 6, lock out the DynSA user. So DynSA is really the old Dynamics SA login. It was there pre-SQL. So before we had SQL and SA, we had DynSA. It is required to be there and required to be the owner of the database. But like SA, it's an anonymous user. Both SA and DynSA, if someone logs in with those, you don't know who they are. So you have to then try to figure out who made a particular change or who did what. If 5 or 6 people have it, no one will ever admit it, and you'll never figure out who did that thing that is becoming a problem for your organization. So DynSA has to exist, it has to be there, and it has to be the owner of the database, but you don't have to use it. So the beauty of this is you can create a password for DynSA and intentionally forget it. Go to the internet and get one of those they have tons of password generators, and they'll generate this giant long password, drop it in there, and then forget about it. You can always reset it using SA, or we'll talk about some other ways to do that, but you don't want people to be able to use it on a regular basis. Number 7, instead of using SA or DynSA, you can use a regular GP user to add and remove users, adjust security, do all of those things. They do not have to be the SA user. They do not have to be the DynSA user. All of this is detailed in the GP security manual that nobody ever reads. It's right around page 35. But as part of that, we've also got a white paper here to describe exactly what your options are to deal with that. And the beauty of this is it's actually more secure than SA or DynSA. The user is known, so if something goes wrong, you know what user made the change. Additionally, there's a double bit of security here because the user has to have rights in SA, but with the way GP logs them in, they can't actually do anything in SA. They have to do it through GP. And they have to have certain permissions in GP. So SA doesn't need any special permissions. It just needs to exist. So in this case, there's 2 places that permissions need to be set for a user, both in SQL and in GP. And if either one of those are not set, the user won't be able to adjust security. And as I said before, the user can't change things in SA because of the way that GP encrypts their password. It only allows them to interact via GP. So this is way safer than using SA or DynSA. We can tackle questions on this in the chat when we get done. I know I frequently get questions from administrators on this, so make sure if you have any questions to drop it in there. But one more resource here. And I'm pointing you to some resources here. The vast majority of these are free, and I will call out whether or not they are free. In 1 or 2 cases, there are some paid examples because there is no free example. If you want to address this item, your only option is a paid example. You're all big boys and girls. You're going to decide what's right for your organization and what makes sense to buy or not buy. My point is just to make sure that you know that it's there so that you can assess whether it works for you. All right, number 8, don't rely on included roles. The included roles in GP were designed by software developers. So for example, if it's an AP role, they figure that person should have everything in accounts payable. We know that's not a good idea. We don't want people creating vendors, entering a payable, and then generating the check without any other interference by someone else. It's an easy way to add your brother-in-law, create a fake invoice for them, generate a payment, and then everybody split the money at family dinner. While that's great if you're on the receiving end, it's not great for the company because it's fraud, and in the long run, it's not great for you because it usually involves some jail time. So the included roles are not designed for good segregation of duties. You really want to clean those out and ultimately build your own roles. And when you look to do that, the best way to do it is to build your own roles using the existing tasks. The tasks that are there are pretty clean. They'll get you 80 or 90% of where you want to go. They also include some hidden things like invisible windows or reports that you're going to need. If you try to build everything from scratch, you will miss all of those items and you'll have kind of a really chunky system with a lot of work to fix it. But if you just take the existing tasks and build them into new roles, you will be 80 or 90% more secure than what you are with the default roles. And then to assist with that, I've got a link to a free security matrix. This is just an Excel sheet with all of the tasks, and it allows you to then pull those items together into the roles you want. So you can experiment moving things around. And then when you're done, you would go and make the changes in GP. But you can do all of that setup work and thinking about it in Excel. So then the changes in GP are straightforward. Number 10, leverage the limited and self-serve licenses. These licenses are available for GP, the limited user or self-serve user. It already restricts what these users can do. So, and they're cheaper. So you pay less, you get better security, and it's a whole, and you can still further restrict them. So for example, in a limited license, if I allow someone to maybe review items in accounts payable, a limited license would also allow access to purchasing and purchase orders. But I don't want that. I just want to let them look at payables. Well, in that case, I can still further limit them. The nice thing is with a limited license, they're never going to be able to do something like create a vendor. So for executives, folks who maybe have really limited changes, like they need to fill out their timesheet or they need to maybe enter information for an expense report, the limited and self-serve licenses already come with better security. So there was less money and better security. They're a great tool to use. Number 11, eliminate power users. GP calls power user a role. It's really not. If you think about a role is something I check a bunch of boxes to give people access to. And when I do that, GP is not doing that with a power user. It's simply saying, oh, you're a power user. We're going to override everything. So in that scenario, a power user is granting access that you can't restrict. And I have all kinds of fun examples of where people had too much access and unintentionally created problems, like the person who unintentionally deleted the accounts receivable table because they had too much access in GP. And it took them 2 weeks to get their accounts receivable data back because they didn't have a good backup. It was an honest mistake. The user just genuinely had too much access and didn't know what they were doing. So really, really need to minimize those power users. And there are options to minimize power users, but I would argue no one really needs power users because there are nooks and crannies in GP that you just don't need to make available to everybody. Number 12, don't make increased access persistent. So sometimes people are away on vacation or maybe someone needs to fix something, so you give them additional access. Have a plan to take away that access. This is a big challenge for folks. I saw a stat the other day that there are roughly in financial institutions, in an average financial institution, there are roughly 1,000 users who have not had their access removed. So they're sitting out there, and while those are technically orphaned users, it's even worse when you talk about excess access. So the trick is put something in your Outlook calendar, have a tool that helps you, something, so that when that 2 weeks are over and you need to take away access, you've got a plan to deal with that. Number 13, don't rely on the system password. System password is that extra speed bump password that lets you get to changing users and permissions and all that sort of thing. It is technically encrypted, but it's a simple substitution cipher. It's easily broken. It's documented on the internet how to break it. It is not something you want to rely on. The reality is you want to control folks' access to those areas. The right people need access to change users and adjust system settings and that sort of thing. So once that's done, then whether or not you have the system password is kind of up to you. But as long as you've got the right security, the system password is just a speed bump. So I have 4 or 5 different ways to recover, not even just change, but recover the system password from both inside and outside of GP. It's also a shared password. Everybody uses the same one. So concentrate on getting your security right rather than relying on the system password. Also be careful with functional passwords. These are harder. These are things like the password. You can set a password to put vendors on hold, to change credit limits, that sort of thing. The problem with these passwords is they may be necessary. They may be critical for what you're trying to do, but they are stored in plain text in SQL. So they're really easy to access. You can actually go into Smart List Designer and simply start to design a new smart list, go look at the appropriate table, and you will be able to see those passwords in plain text. So this is the kind of thing that you need to change them regularly, and they're shared. So it's more important to change them regularly and limit who gets them. Number 15, have a process to provision users. So when you create a new user, have a process. Email is often not enough because it's really not telling folks what they need. And copying users is usually a bad idea because you'll have that user who's been there for 15 years. They've done every job in the company and they have way too much access. So if you copy their access and give them to a new user, at that point, you're now giving that new user 15 years worth of excess access. But while email can be sufficient, what you need in that email is more detail. I need this user, they need to have these roles and access to these companies. So you got to have a process to be able to add those new users. Number 16, restrict tools. I'm a huge fan of pistol and combiners and modifiers. I have fought with the Dynamics GP team to get some of those items in there, but at the same time, they're dangerous. If someone's created a fake vendor and done a bunch of inappropriate things and they feel that maybe the company's starting to get suspicious, you run a combiner and combine that fake vendor with a real vendor, and it becomes next to impossible to figure out what was done inappropriately. So you want to make sure that those tools are effectively restricted. Eliminate multiple access options. This is a great tip and an easy win. You can do this tomorrow. You can do this before we're done today and make your system more secure. So for example, there's 3 ways to enter a journal entry: transaction entry, quick journal, and clearing entry. Nobody uses clearing entry. I'm going to say that definitively. I tried to use it as a controller and it's terrible. Very few people use quick journals. Both of those, the new batch pieces, batch entry has options for recurring batch entries and being able to wipe out the dollars and replace that info, which is really what quick journals do. All of that's available as part of transaction entry now and the changes to the way a batch works. The problem is transaction entry and clearing entries don't support any kind of approvals, no workflows, nothing. So just turn them off. Go into the roles that access that and deny, or the tasks that provide those, and just deny that access. Your people aren't using it anyway. I can almost guarantee that. Same thing for AP. There's 3 ways to process an invoice. There's multiple ways to process a check. Unless you might have 1 or 2 users that need maybe the different ways, but otherwise restrict everybody down to 1 way. That'll give you a much tighter security. Folks aren't doing transactions maybe through a side door. 18, separate master records from transactions. And this is a great tip. If you can take someone and carve them out of transactions and say this person does customers, and this person maybe does vendors, but they don't do any transactions, that's a great way to do that. Or folks who can change a fiscal period can't change a journal entry. We'll talk a little bit more about this. If you can get this right, if you can separate master records from transactions, you will be safer than 80% of the people out there. This is a big one, and it is easier to do than you think. We'll talk about some techniques in a couple minutes. 19, separate multi-part transactions. This is the next level of that. So these may all be transactions, but we want to keep people from vendor invoices and payments. We want to protect people from customer receipts and write-offs. If you can receive a customer's money and then write it off, you could potentially put that money in your pocket and no one is ever the wiser. So you want to be able to protect those items. These are really simple stuff. If it's just a matter of looking at your users and how can you maybe adjust who does what to fix these items. Number 19 is use mitigations. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about so far lead back to system security. Can I restrict people in system security? Can I let one person do this with security, another person do another thing with security? That's the ideal way. A mitigation or a mitigating control is where you're doing something outside of system security to really reduce your risk. That's the goal. We'll talk about some of these mitigations, but things like workflows, reviews, bank rec is a traditional mitigation. The reason we do bank reconciliations is just that. We get something external to review our risk around cash. For 21, restrict journal entry posting. So this is another great piece. An ideal way to do this is folks who enter journal entries are not allowed to post them or approve them, but you can take that posting and approval piece and hand it to someone who does fiscal periods, posting, approvals, reviews, all that sort of thing. They can have a whole bunch of different jobs. They just don't get to do post journal entries. Some people say, well, I need to be able to review what's in that journal entry before I can approve it, and that allows them to make changes. Give them a report. Let them pull a smart list, let them run the journal entry report. Just don't let them actually make changes to a journal entry. 22, redesign processes. So with some of the things we've talked about, I've seen some folks redesign their processes to get that segregation of duties. So for example, instead of AP entering vendors, AP people enter customers, and then they enter vendor transactions. So now we've separated customers from customer transactions. AR enters vendors instead of entering customers, and now we have that separation between transactions and master records. Those kinds of things can be a great way to do this. You're not adding any people, you're just kind of swapping the jobs around. For 23, the workflows in GP are great for this. You can leverage those for all kinds of things, master records, transactions. The one trick is to make sure that if someone is supposed to do a review before they click that button to approve, that they're actually doing it, that they're not just rubber stamping the approvals. 24, field level security is also a great tool. This lets you restrict individual fields inside of GP. It's a little quirky. So some items can only be used with certain types of fields. So I strongly suggest you play with this in a test environment and test a lot, because you kind of have to build that setup, and the auditors are going to want to test it. So this is a great tool, but it does take a little work to get it right. Number 25, halfway through 50. Don't use activity tracking. Activity tracking is not an audit trail. It will tell you that something happened, when it happened, but not what happened. It'll tell you someone made a change to a vendor, and it was this vendor, and Mark made the change, but it won't tell you what they changed. So you don't know whether they just opened up, looked at it, and clicked the save button, or whether they actually changed anything. You need an audit tool. Number 26 is buy a real audit tool. There is no free audit tool for GP. There are a couple that are available out there. Fastpath has one, Rockton has one. There are a couple of others. I'm not pushing any particular tool. An audit trail tool will tell you what changed, when it changed, and who did it. In addition, the old value and the new value. The street was changed from 123 Main Street to 456 Oak Trail. That's really valuable information to get a handle on your system. 27, don't over provision for inquiry. This is an issue I see with GP, and there's usually one big excuse, or the one that pops up is the vendor maintenance window does not have the same fields as the vendor inquiry window. There are actually a few more on the vendor maintenance window. In my opinion, they're not particularly important. But I have seen people insist, I need access to vendor maintenance so that I can review those items. Not everything is available on the inquiry window. Don't fall for that trap. Don't give them access to the vendor window and allow them to make changes to a vendor. Give them a report. Use the inquiry window. Give them a smart list. Everything on that window is available in a smart list, and you can review data just as easily in a smart list as you can in a window. 27, provision backups as needed. This is not backing up your data. This is users who back up others. So I get this too sometimes. We'll have someone who will say, well, why is this person allowed to enter customers? Oh, they're the backup for our normal person. So when the normal person goes on vacation, person B will enter customers during those couple of weeks. Okay, that's fair. But they don't need access all year long. in order to be able to do 2 weeks worth of work. That doesn't seem like the right idea. If I need someone to watch my house and feed my dog for a week when I go on vacation, I don't give them the keys to my house and the code to everything for the entire year. That's opening up a risk. The better way to do it is before you go on vacation, you give them the stuff. Before this person or right before, as this person goes on vacation, you give them the access they need. And then when the person comes back, you take it away. You don't need to provision someone for 365 days a year just for 2 weeks of vacation. For 29, I know we'll get lots of pushback. People say, well, I have a very small department. We're limited in what we can do. I get it. I've run small departments, and I can tell you, I talk to Fortune 500 companies, and they will tell you, we have a small AP department. We have a small AR department. Automation has shrunk all of these places, but that doesn't mean you can't get segregation of duties. Much of this is about how you design that process. Folks can enter but not post. Folks can do master records but not transactions. It's a lot of just reorganizing the process, and every organization has different opportunities. So I know accountants seem to think they're not creative when in fact they're way more creative than they think they are. Maybe you're not a sculptor, but you can design a pretty good process that can really improve the segregation of duties in your organization and the security of your organization. So get creative. Number 30, we're going to step back for a couple of tips here. You really need to stay objective. So in some cases, we get in our groove and we're like, oh yeah, that's that transaction I see all the time. I see it again. Oh yeah, I saw that last week. And then when you really take a good look at it, it's not the same transaction. So part of staying objective here is keeping your eyes open and understanding, that's the second or third Verizon payment we paid in a month. That's not appropriate. What's going on here? Or I know it was the CFO who asked for this thing, but it still makes me suspicious a little bit. So I'm going to just go confirm. That's a great way to prevent things like phishing incidents or other scenarios where someone is trying to trick you out of dollars. So part of this is just staying aware and understanding how your system runs and being aware of what's going on around you. Number 31, part of the job is to ask difficult questions. Why does a controller need to enter AP transactions? Hint, they don't. Why do we really need AP managers to set up vendors? Probably don't. You didn't hire an AP manager because of their amazing vendor setup ability. No, you hired them to manage a department. For the top one, I've seen three fraud cases where the controller was getting the American Express bill and entering it into accounts payable and coding it themselves. And in all three cases, they were committing fraud. So I won't say this definitively, but if your controller is getting the American Express bill, coding it and entering it into accounts payable, I would ask some very difficult questions. We don't hire controllers for their data entry ability. 32, this is an oddball one. Let users log in with Active Directory. With GP, you have a password and you have to log in. If you read the security manual, Microsoft pretty heavily, it's their generic language, but they pretty heavily recommend logging in with Active Directory and relying on Active Directory for your login, and then they don't provide Active Directory login for GP. So there is a Fastpath tool. It is a paid tool. If this is something you're interested in, it's available. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but we do see auditors and organizations pushing more and more for single sign-on. All right. Up next, secure more than just GP. SQL Server, SSRS, other things that plug into GP. So I've got some friends at Smart Connect. They make a pretty nice integration tool. If I prevent my user from entering a journal entry, but then in Smart Connect, I give my user the ability to import a journal entry, I've just bypassed my security controls. And you don't want to do that. So you want to look at those other systems. Same thing if I'm using a CRM tool to bring in customers, and yet I've prevented someone, I allow them to do it in the CRM tool and prevent them from doing that inside of GP, where otherwise they have access. I'm opening doors for folks to be able to do things that I really want to prevent them from doing. So you do need to look at other systems that plug in. For 34, we talked earlier about power users. One of the other big problem with power users is they don't show up on security reports. And the reason they don't is because there's no box checked next to them. The report says, show me everyone with access to vendors. Power users don't have access to anything. They have access to everything. The system just overrides. So if someone says, I need to see everyone who can generate a check in your system, you can pull a report like that out of GP and it will not include your power users. The trick is anytime you're reporting on security, you also need to pull a report with power users on it and submit both of those pieces. Otherwise, we're back to another career limiting move. If you tell an auditor or management or maybe a banker who is reviewing your information, these are all of the users who can generate a check, and they go look through your system and find some other users, you're going to have a credibility problem. And whenever that happens, those other users are power users, invariably. So if you pull a security report, pull a power user report. 35, leverage free tools. There are lots of presentations and blogs and other things that list a bunch of free tools for GP. I've got some free resources here that we're talking about. Some of these are really nice for security pieces, so it's worth spending the time and energy to find what you can. There are some other great tools that can speed and ease putting data in, and things like being able to import data or make data entry easier also means fewer mistakes. This whole thing is we're trying to get the most appropriate and correct financial statements possible. And anything you can do to make those financial statements more likely to be correct, restricting security, restricting what people can do, ensuring that transactions are processed correctly, all of that gets those financial statements as correct as possible. For 36, perform regular access reviews. This is a really common requirement for organizations. You're going to pull your security out of GP and folks are going to review that they have the appropriate roles. In some cases, you may pull your roles and review that they have the appropriate tasks and security objects. Most organizations, there's a minimum requirement to do this annually. 37, check for orphaned users. These are folks who have left the organization or should no longer have access to GP. Maybe they've moved into marketing or something like that. You want to review all of your GP users on some type of recurring basis. I've seen everything from monthly to annually, but you want to remove those orphaned users and make sure they're getting out of the system. 38, remove any unnecessary roles. So after you've built your new roles for GP, you want to go ahead and remove those roles that you're not using so that they're not accidentally assigned to someone down the road and granting them inappropriate access. 39, phase security changes. The beauty about everything we've talked about today is you don't have to do it all at once. The goal is simply to be more secure tomorrow and then more secure the next day. So if tomorrow you can go and remove access to multiple ways to do a journal entry, you'll be more secure. If rearranging your process is going to take a couple of weeks, that's fine. Schedule that piece out. If you're going to redo your security from scratch, great, but start in an area. Make journal entries more secure or make AP more secure. Yes, there are still risks in the other part of the organization, but we fixed this part. Then let's go to the next part. Big bang security fixes are problematic. They're really just a giant pain to troubleshoot. Leverage user who posted. GP in some of their areas in the table has the user who posted those transactions. So be sure to use and leverage that as well. That's helpful. It's not as good as an audit trail, but at least show you who posted the transaction. Number 41, there are new user approval workflows. So these are helpful with user provisioning. They're not full provisioning, but you can set up a user and then have a workflow go out and someone can review that piece and approve it. So it's a way of getting additional control over user provisioning. The same thing is available for roles. So not just changes to users, but changes to roles as well. You don't want someone to take a role that is really restricted, maybe it's marked as read-only, and then suddenly change it to let a user do a bunch of things. This is really common. I see this a lot when we're working with folks. And we'll see, we have a role that is marked read-only, and as soon as we dig deep into it, there are lots of non-read-only things in there. So this is a way to have someone review those changes and approve it before you've got changes. For 43, identify denied security objects. So Dave Musgrave's GP Power Tools, this is a paid product. It's the only product I've found that does this though. When a user gets denied access to a window, it'll tell you what window the access was denied to. So maybe you're trying to give a user access and you can't figure it out. In a lot of cases, folks will just say, forget it, and they'll give them power user, and that's the wrong answer. One nice thing about Power Tools is it will tell you this is what they're being denied access to, so that you can go then and find that and get their security right, not just grant them power access. 44, as we roll toward the end here, find and control related windows. So as you're thinking about security, don't just think about windows, think about like vendor. In the vendor window, you can access vendor addresses and electronic address. Those windows are available other ways as well. So maybe I've restricted the vendor window, but someone could still go in kind of a different way and go to the vendor address window. And while I may not be able to change the vendor, I could change the address and send those checks to my house. Or I could change the electronic banking pieces and send those electronic payments to my brother-in-law, that sort of thing. So you want to make sure you're also restricting related windows as you look at security. 45, find and fix segregation of duties conflicts. Ideally, you want to find those areas where users have access to more than one part of a process, all of the things we've talked about, in a way that might allow them to manipulate the financial statements. This one is really, really hard to do without a tool. Fastpath does have a tool, but without a tool, it's a lot of spreadsheets that are connected. 46, take a risk-based approach. When you're looking at your security, figure out where your big risk is and start there. Every auditor is going to tell you the same thing. If something is low risk, save it till the end, but figure out, is my risk in payables, inventory? Is it in receivables? Is it in cash? Figure out those high-risk items and tackle them first. That is the right way to approach security. 47, use approvals. GP has a bunch of approvals that can be turned on. They are clunky sometimes, but they do work. So don't be afraid to use those. Maybe you're not ready to build a workflow yet. You can turn on approvals. 48, we have a bit of a blind spot here in the accounting world, and I'm working to try to change that. More responsibility should not equal more access. We talked about a variant of this, but this is counterintuitive because we all think our boss makes more money than us, so they should have more access. They have more responsibility after all. But CEO and CFO jobs are not transactional jobs. We talked about this in some other areas, but especially these two jobs. No one hires a CEO for their ability to key journal entries. No, they have way other responsibilities. So in most cases, CEOs and CFOs should have read-only access to anything they want. They really should not have any access to make changes in a system. And I would be a little concerned if a CFO wants to make significant changes. Something like a controller, their job might be to help you get your journal entry right, to help you think through what should the journal entry be, what should we debit and credit. It's not their job to do entries. All right, as we come near the end, you want to regularly reset those functional passwords. We talked about being careful with them. These are the shared passwords for things like changing credit and putting vendors on hold. They're shared and everybody's going to know them a week from when you make that change. So you want to really limit access and you really want to reset them regularly. 50, don't neglect workflow security. Workflow is fantastic, but there are workflow managers who have rights to make changes to workflow. So you want to keep an eye on what they do. Workflow does have audit trail inside of workflow, so you can see who made that change to a workflow. That's a great place to review. As we get to the end here, I work for Fastpath. We do have some tools to address a couple of these. So I'll just throw this slide up for a second. Audit trail, segregation of duties, that sort of thing. If you're interested, feel free to talk to us later. And then last but not least, I have a bunch of books that I've written, some of them with friends of mine like Belinda Allen, who some of you will know. The vast majority of them are around Dynamics GP. The newest one is the Security and Audit Field Manual dedicated to security. And then if you're just sick of all of this when you're done, we've got a couple of novels that I've written. Beware, I do kill a bunch of people in that, but way better to do that in a novel than in real life. So I think that's it for me. Make sure to hit up the questions and we'll take care of those pieces. And I just want to say thanks everybody for hanging out with me here at DynamicsCon. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to DynamicsCon. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'm Mark. You're going to see a little bit behind me. I'm coming to you live today from Walt Disney World. I'm sitting in a pirate room, so that's the pirate ship behind me. When we're done here, I am off to go see Rise of the Resistance. So you are the second funnest thing I'm doing all day, which is sitting and answering questions here. So please drop some questions in the chat, and let's see if we can tackle a few. We've had a few come in already, so we'll talk about some of those. A couple of questions around workflow security and SA user security. Kind of as I've talked about, the biggest key is if appropriate users are granted access to sysadmin in SQL, and then the access you need them to have in GP, they should be able to do anything that SA can do. The nice thing about that is you can then still limit them. It's not always wide open like SA can do. And something I don't always talk about, but just a brief mention, I did have someone we were working with, they had excessive access. They actually were using the SA password for day-to-day transactions on a very slow GP system, and GP locked up on them, and so they were just pushing buttons trying to get the process that was running to finish. And in the process of doing that, they managed to accidentally hit a couple of screens that deleted a table in GP, and they managed to delete their accounts receivable table. So you can do that with excessive access in GP. That is not something that you want to happen very often. In this case, they didn't have any backups, and they had to go back 2 weeks to find an old paper copy to rebuild their AR, and it was not pretty. It was not something that was fun. So we talk a lot when I do security presentations about fraud and misstatements, but all of these things we've talked about also just help beat mistakes. They help protect the organization against significant mistakes because multiple people are looking at these things. Multiple people are reviewing transactions and doing that sort of timeout. Let's take a look at this before we actually push this thing through. So security is more than just fraud. It's more even than just getting the financial statements right, intentional misstatements of the financial statements. It also helps protect against just accidental problems. And there was a story yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about an electric vehicle manufacturer, one of the really little ones, not Tesla or anybody like that, but one of the smaller ones that is publicly traded. They've now found significant just mistakes that is causing them to have a restatement. Their stock took a significant hit. The mistakes were things you would think were basic, like misclassifying research and development items. Instead of R&D, those items should have been cost of sales. So that's a pretty significant hit to their financial statements. Fortunately, it didn't affect cash, but apparently they got a whole lot of things misclassified along the way. So no evidence of fraud at this point, but even without fraud, you can still really make your life miserable. All right, so let's see how we're doing with some questions here. Question about securing data outside the ERP system. There are some tools that can do it. If the item is SQL-based, there are a lot more tools that can do it. The good part is most of the items outside the ERP system are a lot smaller in scope. Usually we're talking about an integration tool or even CRM, something like a CRM product or Salesforce or Microsoft, whatever they're calling CRM these days. Tend to plug into the sales side. So you're not having to secure an entire ERP system. You're having to secure parts of it and how it would then affect an area of your financial statements, not the entire thing. So I would look at that, and then you're going to spend, and then the tricky part, and there are tools that can do it. Fastpath has some tools. It's not a Fastpath commercial, but being able to look at cross-application SOD is a tricky thing. There are only a few things that can do it in the market right now. But if someone can create a customer in CRM and then refund that customer in Dynamics GP, you have a risk and a pretty significant one. That is a great way to funnel some money to your brother-in-law and split the money at family dinner. That's not a suggestion. This is not a how-to session. Just talking about the kinds of things you want to look for and be careful with. So a lot of folks are yammering about novels. I haven't got another one in the works just yet, although I've been doing some more writing. So we may see something here. COVID was really busy. We had some opportunity to do some things work-wise that would not have been possible in a normal year with all the travel and everything. So I put my head down and we got a whole lot of good stuff done at work. So novels may be coming, but not a whole lot just yet. For those of you who've not read them, a lot of people seem to like them, so they're available on Amazon. And then field level security, there was a question or two about that. I really like field level security. It's the setup that is a little odd. And what's a little odd is there are certain types of fields that can have certain types of security. So some fields you might be able to require a password to make changes. Some fields you might be able to kind of hide, others not so much. So you got to kind of play with it to get the type of security you're trying to set matched to the type of field you can set it on, and then do a whole bunch of testing on it. So I love field level security. I don't blanket recommend it just because it takes a lot of work to get that right. Once it's right, it seems to work great. I know David made a comment in the chat that sometimes things can field level security can kind of undo itself occasionally. I haven't seen quite as much of that. I see more where just it's tough to get it right in the first place. So just expect to spend some time and energy getting those things right in the first place. And then questions for sure on small company segregation of duties. This is hard. No one's going to tell you that this is an easy thing to do, but it's also one of those things that because it's hard, people make a lot of excuses. You got to be careful with the excuses there. The challenge is people say, well, it's hard to do, or we don't think we can do it, so we're not even going to try. I've done it in a really, really small organization. We did things like we had an audit trail tool and we monitored changes to vendors, and the AP team that was making changes to those vendors had to substantiate them. So I had an accountant who was not in that team that once a week would review all of the changes to vendors. AP team would have to provide proof of that change. So an invoice or a notification of an address change, something like that. And so someone will review that documentation against the new vendors before those vendors could be paid. You have to get creative with some of that stuff. If you're not especially creative, I think you're more creative than you realize. There's a certain type of process creativity that doesn't get the credit it always should. But there's lots of people who can help with that too. You can make a lot of progress with small company segregation of duties. Some of those may be after the fact. Some of those are going to be comparing, doing the appropriate things like comparing budgets to actual. That's a great test to see if numbers seem whacked out. You know, if you're expecting to spend $1,000 a month on cell phone bills and suddenly it's $1,200 or $1,300, that's a good place to start double checking and make sure A, things weren't misclassified, or B, maybe someone didn't sneak an extra personal Verizon bill in there and now you're paying their personal cell phone bills. So those are the types of things that that you need to be able to work through. Let's see. Question from Darlene. Periodically, opening the security lookup for users, there's a missing user record or blank row, and then it comes back a later time. I haven't seen that. Honestly, it just kind of sounds like a glitch at this stage. Yeah, that just sounds like maybe there's almost there's a visual item there or an interface item there rather than a data issue there. Someone has a question, a list or recommendation of how to know which SQL and Excel reports are available to the built-in roles in SQL security. So from a SQL security standpoint, I'm not 100% sure. It looks like Biat has dropped something in there to help. So thanks for that, Biat. All right. A couple other places to look, just fun stories. I know I've talked about some of this, but again, keep an eye on what controllers are doing, CFOs, CEOs. Honestly, I suspect all of you are great at doing transactions, and yet most of you didn't get hired for the CEO position. And that's because that's not a transactional job. So if your senior execs are actually inputting transactions rather than just advising on transactions about how to get it right, that's a pretty big red flag. I'm on vacation at Disney World. You can see the pirate ship in the background right there. You need to make your accountants take vacations. Not taking vacations is also a fraud indicator. Often in fraud cases, we find that folks who didn't take vacation didn't do that because they were doing something inappropriate in the accounting system and needed to make sure that they could keep doing that, where if someone else was looking at their process, they might ask difficult questions. That's actually a common way that fraud gets caught, is someone finally goes on vacation for a week or two, and then their replacement catches the issue. So this is the type of thing to look out for. We have a question about rebuilding roles. The built-in tasks are actually really good. I'm not going to call them 100% because there are a couple of glitches in them, but the reality is the current roles are absolutely terrible. And excuse me, I'm tied up for a minute. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So the tasks are actually really good. They will get you 90% of the way there. You might run into a bum task somewhere along the way, but they're not bad at all. Whereas if you're talking about something like roles, the roles are terrible. But if you take the existing tasks, you build them into new roles, it may not be 100% perfect, but nothing's 100% perfect. You will be so much better by doing that than anybody else. And again, some of this is you don't have to be perfect, but if you're better than other targets, it makes it a whole lot harder. People are less willing to try to do something in your organization versus someplace else that they might go and work. People see that you're on the ball, you're keeping an eye on things, you're pushing, that's the way to make it happen. Last question, Sean asked if we had to pick one fraud preventative change, what would you do? I think for me, the really big one that can have the biggest impact is if you just separate master records and transactions. That one alone will go a very long way from a segregation of duties standpoint. So I think we are getting pretty close to the end here. And I think we're going to leave it there. So with that, everyone, I just want to say thank you all for showing up for DynamicsCon. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm looking forward to doing a lot more of these, and I'm going to go play on Rise of the Resistance. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.